All right. Well, welcome back to another episode of the Create the Ripple podcast. I'm your host, Candice Smiley, and today we're going to I'm excited for today's guest. So, today's guest is a very dear friend of mine. I get excited when I get to chat with him because he's my buddy. He's also my ex boyfriend. He's also the guy that I was in a relationship with that ended in 2020 that prompted the intense healing. I will put a link for the feminine balance coach who helped me out to do a majority of that healing down below. And I will link you to a post where I said a thank you to a few other people. But he's on the show today. A couple of reasons for that. Number one, I know you guys love a good gossipy episode where you can listen to me chat with somebody and see an evolution of who I was to who I am today. Also, because James is an intelligent individual, highly entertaining, and we engage in very interesting conversations. We are very different people. Very different people. However, we have come to an amazing place in our relationship. And I think it's important for those of us who are working on ourselves and continue to develop it. It certainly was important for me with Inara. It's my daughter, who's 7.5, for her to see that sometimes relationships change energy, space, and pace. Sometimes you change the description of the relationship, but it doesn't mean those people disappear from your life forever. I think that this is healthy. And I think embracing that's really important. So it's exciting for me that James and I are still able to connect and we are still able to be friends post an intense time of healing. So, without any further ado, I will basically read you through his bio, which I could basically tell you, but I'm going to read what he wrote because it's pretty good. So, he's a father of two amazing daughters, Rebecca and Summer Leigh. He's a mortgage broker and a former car salesman. He's also the former manager of a large car leasing portfolio in Edmonton. Sales, or our love of sales, was actually one of the things that connected us very early on. He's a musician, part-time guitar slinger for David Jukebox Leigh. Yes, that is his brother. He's a lover of all things food, true. Cooking, eating, yes, also true. And dining out, very much so. If you want to know of a good restaurant in Edmonton, James Leigh is the one to ask about it. He can't think of too many foods he doesn't like. This is also true. He's a regular athlete. He studies Kung Fu, and he's now currently a newbie at the sport of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He loves the sport. He really does. He's an avid reader, and he usually has a book or two on the go. Most recently, he's been reading Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell and Stephen King's The Shining. Welcome, James. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Create the Ripple podcast. I'm your host, Candice Smiley. Here we trust the ningle and we tell the truth. This is a podcast. We are looking to have conversations that matter, conversations that take courage to engage in, where we cut through the noise that exists online to bring you incredible content, amazing speakers, and stories to inspire you to live your best, listen to yourself, and tell the truth of who you are and who you just might become. It's good. Okay, so your questions were, do we have free will?
Yeah. Oh, hit me with the big one right off the bat.
You started it.
That was my first one. Well, okay. So as you know,
so do we have free will? Because you say current neuroscientific research says probably not.
Right. It says probably not. So there, guys. Okay. So the reason this came up on my radar is because I'm an avid listener to podcasts and things like that. One of the people that I've enjoyed listening to over the years has been Sam Harris. And Sam Harris is well known as a thinker, but also, he's a neuroscientist. So when I cited that neuroscientists think that, that's actually who I was quoting. And the reason why is he's run experiments. He stuffed people in MRI machines and gotten them to do basic tasks like, pick this, or he gives them a bunch of random questions that require them to make choices, right?
Sure.
And then they read the data that they get from the MRI and probably other ways of testing. And then they look at that and they postulate that we don't really have any choices, that we're just operating on pre-programmed responses that we've programmed over the years by, our experiences, but not like, for example, if every time you drink coffee, you get heartburn, you're probably less likely to drink heartburn, unlike me, who's addicted to coffee, and I drink coffee anyway, but yeah. So, but those things would, pre-program you to just go, yeah, I'll pass on the coffee and I'll drink green tea or something else, right? Or maybe
Sure.
not a hot beverage at all. Or maybe if you get rejected a lot when you go up to try and meet people, you're less likely to meet them.
This was like
So
our
you
last
just,
conversation. I was like, I wish we were recording that one. And for my listeners, that's one of the reasons why I asked James onto the show, is because sometimes when we're having conversations, the side conversation is like, oh man, this would be a great podcast. But we were talking about the swipe left, swipe right. Which way do you swipe? I've never been on an app.
on a dating app, if you
Yes.
like someone, you swipe right.
Okay,
And
thank you.
if you reject someone, if you're like, no, this person is not for me, you go left,
No
right?
left. Okay, good to know.
Yeah. So something could actually be a hard right or a hard left. You're like,
Well,
yes,
yes,
no.
no. Well, but I mean, that's really quite interesting. So why do you think that they are wrong? Because of that? Like, explain. Explain.
Well, okay, without having my hands on the actual apparatus that they're using to determine this idea, I think that what they're seeing, okay, so it's been described as they can see neurons in the brain firing, right?
Okay.
Even before the person, indicates a choice. And I'm like, well, that's, maybe that is the process of the person actually making the choice, right? I think we do have free will. I think that we do take moments, pensive moments, and make sure a lot of decisions are like, I'll have the cheeseburger today, or I'll have the fries with mayo, but I always have mayo, so I'll have mayo, right? So, but today I'll have the chipotle mayo, right? Right?
Yes.
I think that we have rote responses that we're just used to making because we've gone down that corridor 10, 15 million times, or 10,000 times, and that's where we go. But I think that we also have moments where we sit and we think about something. We have that chess-like thinking, and we do have free will. And yes, of course, all of our choices are shaped by our past experiences, but new information can often change a decision you made or a decision you're about to make, right?
Yes. Well, I'm just thinking because, and I mentioned this in the bio before I got started, that you and I are very different people, which again makes for interesting conversation. And we've often had this discussion, especially recently, where we're sort of coming to an agreement of, I'm not going to change your mind and you're not going to change my mind, but we're going to have an interesting debate where the other one's willing to listen to what the other one has to say. So is that basically where this is coming from? This, do we have a chance to sit and change? Like, is that where change comes from?
Yeah, well, I think, okay, how many times have you observed a discussion between two people? So you weren't even part of the discussion.
No.
And you thought, oh, wow, okay, that's interesting what he said. And then you think, oh, wow, that's interesting what she said, or maybe it was he and the other he, whatever.
Sure.
And you think, I used to think differently than that, but I'm becoming engaged by this idea that they've presented. So yeah, I think that can happen.
So that's how we change our mind. That's how we have
I
free
think
will.
that might
we
be.
Stop and think.
Maybe. Well, okay. Let me bring a complete red herring into this now. How about faith? Right. Okay. So as you well know, I'm not a religious person.
No.
Right. I'm very staunchly in the agnostic, very much leaning towards atheist side of things.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Now, am I an opponent of the idea of a god or a god or a plethora of gods, a pantheon of gods, so to speak? Not really. I'm not. If there was, if that's true, okay, but I don't see evidence of it, and so that's what I'm getting at, right? The evidence of my life has indicated to me that it's not true. That people want to see patterns where they're not there. When you go to buy a car and you think, I really want an F-150 truck with, with the nice rims and, I like them. You see them everywhere.
Everywhere.
Right. So you have, you are drawn towards what you want things to be.
Sure.
And I think that oftentimes spiritual people or religious people will interpret events that way all the time. Whereas, I think if one just sat objectively and thought, well, what in my life has indicated this or not indicated that, to some people like me, the experience of my life has shaped what I believe. I haven't made a decision what I believe. I don't think that deciding what to believe is relevant. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Like, I'm going to decide to believe in climate change or decide not to believe in climate change.
But I think a lot of people do, though.
I think that's stupid. I'm going to piss off people with a word like that, right?
Yes, you are.
But okay, let's use a different word. Let's use a word ignorant, and ignorant in the sense that when one is ignorant, it just means they don't know something, right?
Sure.
So if I make a decision based on how I feel as opposed to something I know or don't know, I'm making a poor decision, I think.
For sure.
Right? So, I mean, a climate change denier or acceptor, one way or the other, if they're doing it because they've read a lot of literature, and the literature they're reading or read studies or been exposed to information, shows them that information points in a certain direction, that makes sense. I get it. But if they just decide to believe in something, I think they're not being honest with themselves.
But I think a lot of people do. Like, and I'm thinking about my own upbringing.
Okay.
But I'm just saying, whether that's right or wrong, ignorant or stupid, whatever that might be. I think I've fallen trapped to that because
we all have.
I decided, right, to believe a certain way. And there was a big ceremony regarding the same. I decided I had certain beliefs, and then somebody challenged me on those beliefs. And so I decided to do something different.
Okay, the question I have is, when you decided to believe something,
yes.
Did you in your heart truly wholeheartedly believe it, or was there ever doubt about any of those beliefs?
Well, not at the time, but later, for sure, when someone presented a different belief. And then I made a different decision and carried on forward.
Okay. So you may feel that my position that we don't actually choose what we believe, or I don't think we choose what we believe. I think the experiences that we encounter and the information that we encounter shapes our beliefs.
Yes. I think that makes it challenging too, especially right now, because a lot of decisions that people are making in terms of belief decisions, choices, etc., are very polarizing. But again, it's based on what they're looking at, what they're reading, what they're choosing, to take on. The loudest voice in the room sometimes, often the least qualified in the room, but people are definitely listening and paying attention. And you and I, chatted before the show about, how we wanted to attack some of these topics, being aware that there's a camera on, but also that, the idea here is to not necessarily change anybody's mind, but to simply engage in conversation so that people begin to think, because I think a lot of people live in this, well, where do you believe come from?
I'll bring up a trite example.
Sure.
Flat Earth.
Right.
Right. And we won't bring it up in the context of today's information. We'll bring it up in the context of a couple 200 to 400 years ago, right? In that span, right? Prehistory. And in the context of prehistory, anybody who said that the earth was round was a heretic, and they could even be burned at the stake, or they could be, locked up in a jail cell, or they were absolutely correct, So you just said the loudest voice in the room, while not correct, can often sway the masses and become the common knowledge, even if it's incorrect.
Yeah. We won't dive into how I feel about, that and fact checkers and all that kind of good stuff. Well, hey, pardon the interruption while you're listening to our show. I do hope you are enjoying the content that we are sharing with you today. This is a sponsored advertisement from Phosphor AI. This is an online service that will save you hours of time with your content creation. So this is really important for me to share, because you guys know, having listened to the podcast for a while, that words matter. So this is really a time-saving device. I am stoked about being able to promote it to you. If you are looking to have a blog, or you have a website, or you regularly create posts, and you need to be able to add written word to increase your value, to add to your impact, and to add to your credibility, really, you simply type in your title, and the AI software goes to work and gives you high quality original articles. So That's exciting. You do need to review the article, and it takes about 10 to 15 minutes, they say, to make necessary edits. Of course, add in your own flair, maybe an intro and an outro or something like that. But you get 3 free articles just for creating an account and signing up. After that, if you want to pay for the service, it's a monthly service. And to be honest with you, I have spent some really decent money both on copywriters and on copywriters from Fiverr who are creating blog posts for me. And frankly, these blogs have triple the number of words. And so pretty stoked about that. It is an online monthly subscription service. If you do decide that you're going to do that, you can use code RIPPLE 2022. So that's Ripple 2022. And you will get 5 free articles on top of those 3. So that's 8 free articles just for signing up and getting your paid account. Why waste time writing content for yourself when you can get Fuss for AI to do it for you? Try out their service today and see how much time it can save you. Thanks so much. Enjoy the rest of the show. But again, the idea here is to engage so that people have a chance to think.
And I would ask this question, like anytime one feels like they ought to be the thought police of someone else, right? You know, are you actually correct before you go storming the person's house and or painting a target on them and saying, hey, they're wrong and they're a bad person because they're wrong? Like when you talked about you used the word polarizing a minute ago, and how, you know, different belief systems right now are very polarizing. I think that's because we've assigned, or in the media at large and in the public discourse at large, if someone thinks something, we almost always dump them into a basket with all of these other beliefs that they're supposed to have. And also put a label or two in there, like, you know, they're this or they're that, and therefore they're a horrible person. When in truth, really, most of the people sitting around the table across from us, beside us, you know, are people we love and care about, who love and care about us. And, you know, they're not horrible people, right?
No, and that reminds me of that conversation we had about some emotional intelligence, right? Some emotional maturity. I was actually engaged in a conversation last night with a gal pal, and we were talking about how I'd had an opportunity earlier this week to defend a particular position I had. Not on anything earth-shattering or, you know, impacting of the world, just an opinion. And was sort of shut down mildly, as women are known to do, mildly shut down, sidestepped. And the impact of that and the realizing that sometimes wisdom doesn't say anything. It was like, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut and ask another question and see what the other person believed. And of course, ask another question, and opinions abound. And it's interesting to sit back and listen. And well, you and I have both read the same book about negotiation. And when people say, you're right, they haven't actually had their opinion changed. It's when they say, that's right. And I was reminded of that yet again, because I went, you're right. Simply to move on.
Well, you know, that's true. Yeah. What was sorry, in the beginning you said lots of times, like trying to convince somebody of something or give them information that they're not ready to receive is, you know, the epitome of the Bible verse. And I'm not a biblical guy, as you've heard before, but don't cast pearls before swine, right? The idea of like your pearls of wisdom are being lost on that person. So why share them, right?
Well, and it was a reminder to me, certainly, because if I stood back a little further, as you just mentioned, right, we tend to dump people into these boxes. I took a little step back, you know, mentally, and went, well, this actually fits, you know, that I would be mildly sidestepped based on previous experiences I have and what I know of this individual. And it sort of gave me a broader view. I was like, interesting. I don't know that I want to continue to, you know, engage in this space. And I was thinking a lot about that recently because I'm up leveling again in my life, and you know this, we've talked a lot about this. Sometimes you just choose not to engage with individuals, and I was like, do I want to continue to engage with a boundary? I won't share certain things, I'll just be present, be involved, continue to, you know, hang out. Or is this one of these relationships where maybe I do actually want to, from my mental peace and mental space, and how much does integrity matter, if we disagree on some of these things, do I actually want to take a much bigger step? I'm not judging this person necessarily. I'm just really taking a long, hard look at whether or not hanging out with someone where my own personal integrity feels that compromised just by being in their presence, whether or not that's something that I want to continue. And that's an interesting conversation because a lot of people, especially women, are like, oh, that's so mean. I'm like, well, maybe.
Yeah, but we all do that, and they do too, right?
Yes.
So they'd have to look back in their own lives and admit that there are individuals that they don't hang out with because, I don't know, Susie is so negative when we bring her
Mm.
for wine, or this person's always saying that about that person, whatever it
Yes,
is, right?
that's true.
Oh, they always bring up stories about their cat, and we've heard that same one 5 times, right? I mean, it could be that, or maybe some guy who like keeps talking about the glory days, right? That old
Mm.
Bruce Springsteen song, right?
It's a great song.
Oh, it's a great song. Really good songwriter.
He's
Yeah,
coming to concert, I think. I was like, I gotta go see this guy. Anyway,
yeah, man.
not to digress.
No, but he's great. So I think we all do it, I think even people who say, well, I don't want to think of myself that way.
Sure.
Well, why? We all have to judge what's important in our lives, and time is very important. And so, are you going to spend time in relationships that don't serve you? And to use the phrase serve you makes it sound like, oh, what's it bringing to me? But, I mean, what is it also taking away from me, right?
Yes.
You know, and so, okay, there's people in your life, right? And I think
Mm.
there's different kinds of relationships, right? There's the mentors in your life. They're the people that you're not necessarily bringing a lot of value to, right?
Yes, this is
No,
true.
I'm not,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
We're
yeah.
we're not.
They're the
And we
givers in
say,
this
okay,
one.
but they look on us like they're the sage. Maybe they're that person who's a decade or two older than us and just figure out some things that we haven't,
Hmm.
and and casts us a few pearls here and there, right? And there's a like a continuum, and as you go around the circle, you become more and more like a collaborative friendship where you're on the same level doing the same things, and it's
Hmm.
fun, and you're kind of doing that, and then wow, now I'm more supportive. I'm doing more stuff for this person. And then all the way over here where it's all take on their end. No give at all. And you're just basically helping somebody who really, really needs some help. And there's probably getting beyond that where it's like, well, they've done so much taking, it's just too much. You can't
Yeah.
you can't spend time with them.
I think the biggest challenge for me was, and we've talked about this before, and certainly my listeners would know, the last couple of years have been really about me aligning my life to a space of integrity. It's
Hmm.
just got to be a hell
Okay.
yes or hell no, right? And that's, for me personally. And I just find there's a lot of mental peace when I live in the hell yes or hell no. It's just no middle
Yeah.
ground. And I found that because I couldn't be myself or say what I thought, it was like, well, then this is a no. Like it's just the not being able to express myself when you would know self-expression is it's a value for me, hence the podcast, hence, you know,
Sure.
um, and so when I can't, then it's me making other people comfortable rather than saying, and that was interesting because the day after, I had a horrible day. And it took me all day to retrace it back and say, you know what? This moment started when I didn't step up for myself and say, actually, hey, not to, I understand that what I just said made you uncomfortable or you have a disagreeing point, and I don't want to be just pushed aside on this. And that was really interesting for me that I've come to
Hmm.
this place where I could say, oh, I'm out of integrity, and that's why I'm having a bad day. It's very interesting. So something I got to be really thinking about moving forward.
Hmm.
Because you're like you said, the value of the time, the value of the energy, what is the take and what is the takeaway?
Yeah, and you know what? I mean, I think in all relationships, there's times when you're giving and times when you're taking, and times, or receiving, let's say,
Yeah,
as opposed to taking. Maybe receiving is a better word,
receiving's a better word.
you know. Um, but yeah, if you feel like it's not a positive interaction, or there's not value to it on an ongoing basis, and you think, wow, maybe I'm just gonna not spend a lot more time with that person. That's okay,
Hmm. I agree.
you know. Yeah, and then you don't spend the next day being twisted up,
And
or
feeling
that
bad
day,
about it and being like, wow,
right?
without the guilt or judgment. That wasn't the point. It was just an interesting self-awareness of, wow, this is something I need to pay attention to and maybe make some better boundaries on in the future, and figure out how, if or when that happens again, because it's happened before, to what's my verbiage? How am I going to either A, not engage so I don't get to that place where I feel like I haven't been heard, or what's the language so that the other person doesn't feel
Well,
less
and
than
what's the
either.
relationship, right? Is it a
Mhm.
relationship where it's just some random person who comes up and challenges you on something that you
Mhm.
and or maybe uh, you know, um, characterizes who you are and what you're
Sure.
all about? Who cares what they think? I don't
Mhm.
care, right?
Mhm.
I mean, definitely sometimes those barbs hurt, right? They're
Mhm.
like, oh, okay, that kind of hit someplace where it hurt. I didn't like that very much. But it doesn't really matter because you don't even know that person. Or
Mm.
maybe it does matter a lot because you do know that person, and what they think about something is important, and
Yeah.
what they think about you is important to you. Like but I like the idea that we can't control anybody else but ourselves.
Yeah.
We just can't.
No.
So, you can they know what they think you are and who you think they think you are, but they're not you.
Well, and sometimes these opinions are based on a former version of you. I don't know if you've
Sure.
encountered that, but they're just
Yeah.
like, I'm like, wait, no, that was maybe me 4 years ago. That's not
Or maybe your
not who I
brother or
am today.
sister who was in school ahead of you and was a real
Yes.
troublemaker, and now you've got this reputation of the family being troublemakers, or whatever, right?
Yeah, legit. That's cute that you bring that up. That's cute. My dad actually was really grateful that my aunt went before him because she was a very good student. He brings this up all the time. Thank you for being a good student.
Yeah, that's probably a really good thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So people reinvent themselves. Why and how can this happen? I'm curious at this particular question because I feel like I've done a lot of reinventing over the last couple of years. So I was
Mhm.
curious to know why it ended up on your questions.
Because I think we talk about things like that,
We
right?
do.
We're both interested in personal growth, and
Hmm.
we're both interested in, improving in areas of business, and improving in areas of fitness,
Hmm.
and intellect, all of these things, right? So anytime you look at those kinds of things, you ask yourself, okay, well, if I'm interested in that, obviously I'm trying to reinvent myself on a regular basis in tiny increments, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Maybe big increments sometimes,
Hmm.
depending on what it is. How do people reinvent themselves? How do they decide that they're going to be something that they weren't before?
That's the previous question. So is there an element of the decision at that particular point?
Well,
Now they're
I think
stepping
so.
away from the free will into the reinvention?
No, they're stepping into their free will and they're
Oh,
reinventing themselves.
that's good. That's true.
If
That
they
was
didn't have
good.
free will, why would they want to reinvent
Right.
themselves?
So why? Why do
Ah,
they?
trauma.
Drama. Trauma?
You said drama. That was
I
an
did.
interesting Freudian slip.
I'm still thinking about earlier with the
Trauma.
drama. Trauma.
Okay, so I think it could be trauma. I think yes, it could be drama. It could be a loss of somebody. It could be a financial loss. It could be a loss in stature. It comes to mind the Bitcoin billionaire losing all of his money. You know,
Mm,
you would imagine this is a person who might want to reinvent himself in a way,
for sure.
or, improve his position again, right? To be a billionaire and lose all that. That's pretty wild.
Hmm. I'm thinking though that a lot of those people who do choose to reinvent themselves, they're often they have that mindset of fail often, fail forward, fail fast. I'm not sure I'd
Hmm.
want to fail to, a billion, level. But I think there's an element of, are we assigning it a certain value of good, bad, or otherwise, or is it just simply an experience that we can take some responsibility for and learn from?
Hmm. So give me an example.
Well, I'd want to know, why or how, you got there. I'm thinking specifically about a couple of friends, and they seem to always have the same problems all the time. And I listen and I appreciate it because there is some trauma. So there's some healing going on there. But I think, well, then just make a different decision, because ultimately you can keep on blaming the other person. And you and I have had some personal conversation about this, right? With certain people who continue to, there's a cycle in my life. And at some point you sort of have to take a step back and go, okay, how am I contributing to this problem? How can I change how I'm contributing in this problem? And what steps can I take to minimize the negative impacts? What about
And
that?
the last phrase is important to me when I hear it, because I ask the question, what if you can't impact their further future decisions on this point? What if you can't impact their future behavior? And so are you going to take it onto yourself to have the same response you've had in the past, which may have been to be unhappy with what's going on? Or maybe you say, it's not my part of the ship, I'm moving on. Right?
Not my
in
circus,
terms
not
of
my
that.
monkeys.
Yeah, right. Yeah. This is not my issue.
Right.
That's their issue. I'm not talking about like packing them off and saying, well, you're not my friend anymore. I'm not talking about that. I'm just saying that this is their thing. And, reminds me of the phrase where somebody had this advice, and I thought that was pretty good advice. So they were annoyed because somebody would always come into their office and then complain about the same thing all the time, over and over, about a coworker or about a process in the business or whatever. And that person came across the phrase, well, you're smart. I'm sure you'll figure it out. And that was it. It was like, balls back in your court. I'm not hearing it anymore. Kind of a thing, right? But that's essentially what that phrase says. It's like, oh, well, you're smart. I'm sure you'll figure it out.
Sure.
I think that maybe sometimes we have to do that with those other influences coming to us with the same stuff all the time.
Sometimes I wonder if they're ready to hear it, though, because that's an interesting thing. And I run into that all the time, because I'm often referring someone. I want them to move their life forward in one way or another. At least this is something I've run into recently. And I refer them someone who I think is going to support them, help them with their business, move something forward. And for some reason, they don't get along with this person. They're like, no, thank you. And I'm like, you just want to stay stuck. I need to not get in the way of this. And that's another interesting thing, when you have to basically leave it. But I think a lot of us healers, myself included, we have a tendency to want to move people to where it's more comfortable, and not everybody's ready to let go of the trauma or the drama or whatever it might be in that phase. I mean, I've been there. Quite happy being miserable. Leave me being miserable. I'm ready to change. I will.
Right.
And not before.
Yeah, I think that's all you can do, right? I don't think you can't. It's the old saying, you can't, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't make it drink.
You can't make it drink. No. You can open the door for the cat, and the cat will decide if it wants to go outside.
The cat will decide. Yeah, exactly. The cat will decide if it wants to go back into your bed or not.
Yes. If it's minus 18 outside, like it was this morning, this may have influenced.
Whereas a dog will almost always take. Whereas a dog will almost always take the treat proffered.
Yeah, totally.
You can count on them for that. Yeah. I'm reminded of the picture they show. Just one little cat footprint in the snow, and it's like the door
no, thank you.
Yeah, I'm not doing that.
You're not doing that. No. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening to the episode today. This will actually be a 2-part series. So if you're listening in and this episode has just dropped in a live time, you're going to have to wait a couple of weeks, but we will be posting that. Of course, please stay tuned in to our social media accounts. You can find us mostly on YouTube and TikTok these days, with a small presence on Pinterest. But follow along for that. And of course, we will have part 2 dropping. And when we do, we will, of course, have links for you to refer back and forth between the 2 episodes. But stay tuned. And thanks so much for listening. We'll catch you on the flip side.